This is the story of a marriage that was never about love, a betrayal that was never really about loyalty, and a war that was fought over a stretch of water and the roads running alongside it. In 1568, Oda Nobunaga gave his sister Oichi to Azai Nagamasa, a young lord whose family controlled the northern shore of Lake Biwa. To everyone watching, it looked like an ordinary political marriage between two rising warlords. It wasn't ordinary. It was a transaction. Nobunaga didn't need a brother-in-law. He needed a road, and more specifically, he needed the one corridor he couldn't unify Japan without. A year before that marriage, in 1567, Nobunaga had already adopted an official seal reading Tenka Fubu, a phrase meaning to bring the whole country under control by force of arms. He stamped it on documents and equipment as a direct statement of intent, well before he held enough territory to make good on it. The marriage to the Azai didn't happen in some separate, personal sphere of his life away from that ambition. It happened entirely inside it. Lake Biwa is the largest lake in Japan, sitting almost directly between the capital at Kyoto and the Sea of Japan coast to the north. Two of the country's major highways, the Tokaido and the Nakasendo, ran through Omi province, along its shores, and the lake itself carried boat traffic south toward Osaka Bay, by way of the Yodo River and north toward the port towns on Wakasa Bay. Whoever controlled that stretch of land and water controlled the connective tissue between the seat of imperial authority and the entire northern half of the country. This wasn't a minor regional concern. Merchants based in Omi province, men who would later become famous across Japan simply as the Omi merchants, had already been running trade networks through this exact corridor since the Kamakura period, centuries before Nobunaga was born, carrying goods along the lakeshore on foot and by boat between the rice markets of the capital and the fishing and timber towns of the northern coast. The infrastructure of wealth was already there, sitting along that single stretch of shoreline decades before any of the warlords in this story were even alive. The only question that mattered to anyone with ambition was who got to control it. And the northern shore of that lake, the stretch that connected Kyoto to the entire Hokuriku region, belonged to the Azai clan, operating out of their mountain stronghold at Odani Castle, a position they'd built and defended across 3 generations specifically because of how much value passed beneath it. Under the standard practice of the time, a lord who controlled a stretch of road or shoreline could set up barrier checkpoints, known as Sekisho, manned gates where travelers, merchants, and cargo boats alike had to stop and pay before they were allowed to continue. It was a slow, steady form of income that required no farming, no manufacturing, nothing but the simple fact of standing in the right place, and it gave whoever held that ground real power over everyone who needed to move goods, soldiers, or messages along it. A clan that held a stretch like the Azais didn't need to be the strongest army in the region. They just needed to own the one road everyone else had to use. Kyoto mattered for more than just being a city. It held the imperial court, and at least nominally, the shogunate itself, and any warlord who wanted to be recognized as something more than a regional strongman needed to be able to reach it, garrison it, and be seen operating in its name. Nobunaga had already marched on Kyoto once by 1568 to install a shogun favorable to him, and every future move toward consolidating that influence depended on getting troops, supplies, and information back and forth between his home base and the capital without interference. Lake Biwa's northern shore wasn't just convenient for that. It was the one piece of ground that made it possible at all. Here's what most people miss about the marriage alliance. Nobunaga wasn't securing a friendly neighbor for sentimental reasons. He was buying safe passage through the single corridor he couldn't unify Japan without, and removing the risk that the Azai might one day decide to squeeze that toll a little tighter or close the road outright. As long as the Azai held that shoreline and treated him as family, his soldiers, his supply trains, and his ambitions could move through Omi province without resistance. The alliance wasn't a gift, it was rent, paid in a sister. For 2 years, the arrangement held. Nobunaga marched toward Kyoto, used the Azai's territory as a secure flank, and built the foundation of what would become the most powerful war machine in Japan, while Nagamasa got protection from a rising power and access to the wealth flowing along his own shoreline. Then, in May of 1570, Nobunaga moved against the Asakura clan, who controlled Echizen, the province on the far side of the lake's northern roots and the Azai's oldest ally, a relationship that stretched back 3 generations before Nagamasa was even born. For Nagamasa, this wasn't a small dispute between distant neighbors. Choosing between his wife's brother and his clan's oldest treaty meant choosing which obligation actually defined him, and pressured by his own retainers, he chose the Asakura. He broke the marriage alliance and turned his army against the man besieging Kanegasaki Castle, threatening to trap Nobunaga's entire force in a pincer between 2 enemies at once. When the first reports of that betrayal reached Nobunaga, he didn't believe them. He dismissed the warnings outright, even with multiple sources telling him the same thing. And by the time he accepted it was true, his army was already deep in Asakura territory, with Nagamasa's forces closing in from the direction he'd assumed was safe. He was looking at a pincer that could have ended his life along with his campaign. His men strung out on mountain roads with enemies forming on both sides, and no clear count of how many soldiers Nagamasa actually had in the field. He aborted the invasion immediately, and pulled his army back toward the capital under cover of a rear guard, commanded by one of his own retainers, a man named Kinoshita Hideyoshi. The retreat held, and Nobunaga survived to fight another day, but he didn't forget how close that betrayal had come to finishing him. Here's the part that gets lost in the story of betrayal. The moment Nagamasa switched sides, he didn't just become an enemy. He became something far more dangerous to Nobunaga's plans. He became an obstacle, sitting directly on top of the only road between the capital and the coast. Nobunaga couldn't simply route around Lake Biwa's northern shore. There was no alternate path that didn't cost him weeks and expose his forces to ambush in unfamiliar terrain. Whoever held that shoreline held a permanent toll booth on Nobunaga's entire northern strategy, and now that toll booth was hostile. The armies met at the Anegawa River in July of 1570, a few kilometers from Odani Castle itself, fighting through the shallow water on foot while cavalry searched for footing on the banks on either side. And Nobunaga won decisively. It cost the Azai half their territory, but it didn't end the threat. As long as Nagamasa held what remained of his lands and the Asakura stood behind him, the lake corridor stayed contested, a stretch of road and shoreline that neither side could fully use while the other still had teeth. Nobunaga spent the next 3 years dealing with enemies on every side of his territory, but he never stopped circling back to Omi, because every other campaign he ran depended on keeping that route open. What followed wasn't a single decisive battle. It was a slow strangulation. He planted a permanent garrison at a smaller fortress called Yokoyama Castle, putting his own general Hideyoshi in command of it, and for nearly 3 years that single position choked the routes in and out of the Azai heartland, blocking supplies and reinforcements one convoy at a time rather than breaking the whole position at once. Azai retainers were peeled away one by one in the meantime, the loyalty inside Odani hollowing out long before the walls themselves were ever breached. And finally, in the summer of 1573, Nobunaga turned his main force on the Asakura directly and destroyed their army outright, removing the last force capable of protecting the northern shore. Odani Castle fell within days of that, and Nagamasa and his father both died rather than surrender. The corridor that had started this entire conflict passed permanently into Nobunaga's hands. It's worth sitting with what Nobunaga actually did with that corridor once he had it, because it tells you everything about why he wanted it in the first place. He didn't simply station troops there and move on. A few years later, between 1576 and 1579, he built an entirely new castle, Azuchi, directly on the eastern shore of Lake Biwa, at the exact point where the Tokaido and Nakasendo highways converged on their way into Kyoto. The location let him watch and control traffic on the lake and on both major roads simultaneously, close enough to the capital to project power over it, far enough away to stay clear of the fires and political chaos that periodically consumed the city itself. Azuchi wasn't a defensive fortress in the traditional sense. It was a statement. The keep, called the Tenshu, rose 7 stories and 46 meters into the air, an architectural innovation no Japanese castle had attempted before, with a gilded octagonal belvedere crowning the top floor and an open atrium running from the basement up through the 4th floor ceiling, every wall painted by the era's leading court artist, Kano Eitoku, a Jesuit missionary living in Japan at the time. Louis Froisse wrote that the tower was more majestic and refined than anything he'd seen in the towers of Europe. This was a man announcing, in stone and gold leaf, exactly what the corridor he'd just taken from the Azai now meant to him. Then he did something that mattered even more than the castle. Nobunaga declared the town around Azuchi a Rakuichi Rakuza zone, a free market with no guild restrictions, and he began tearing down the Sekisho toll barriers that lords across the region, the Azai included, had used for generations to tax anyone passing through their territory. He even required travelers on the Nakasendo to stop and lodge overnight in his castle town, deliberately funneling commerce into the local economy he now controlled directly. The corridor that the Azai had once used to collect tolls one barrier at a time became, under Nobunaga, an open economic engine, with the tolls stripped out and the profits flowing toward unification instead of toward a single clan's regional independence. He wasn't just removing a military threat, he was dismantling the entire economic model that had given the Azai their hold over him in the first place, and replacing it with one that served his ambition to rule the whole country instead of just one province. Nobunaga didn't get to enjoy his statement for long. In the summer of 1582, he was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and died at Honnoji in Kyoto. Within about a week, Azuchi Castle itself burned to the ground. No one is entirely sure who set the fire, whether it was looters moving through the chaos after his death, or one of his own sons trying to deny it to a rival. But the building that had stood as the single clearest physical statement of what Nobunaga had taken from the Azai and turned into his own monument was gone almost as quickly as it had gone up. The man who dismantled one family's fortress to make a point about controlling the corridor ended up losing his own monument to the same kind of sudden total collapse just 9 years after Odani fell and only 6 years after Azuchi's construction had even begun. The Omi merchants who'd already been trading along that corridor for centuries didn't disappear when the fighting ended, and they didn't disappear when Azuchi burned either. If anything, Nobunaga's reforms had set up exactly the conditions they needed to expand. When Azuchi was destroyed, those merchants resettled at a new castle town called Omihachiman, and once the Tokugawa shogunate took full control of the country at the start of the 1600s, the same merchants were granted priority passage through checkpoints across the entire nation. Many of them organized their business around a principle later called Sampo-yoshi, three-way satisfaction, the idea that any transaction worth making had to benefit the seller, the buyer, and the surrounding community all at once. The network that grew out of that privilege and that philosophy eventually ran from Hokkaido in the far north to Kyushu in the south, built on the open road economic model Nobunaga had first imposed, by force, on the very shoreline he'd taken from the Azai. The Azai clan likely understood that their land had value. What they may never have fully grasped is that they weren't fighting a war over family honor or a broken marriage at all. They were the last obstacle standing between Oda Nobunaga and a piece of geography his entire vision for the country depended on. And once that obstacle was gone, he didn't just occupy it. He rebuilt its entire economic purpose from the ground up, stamped his own seal on it, and then lost the monument he built there almost as fast as the Azai had lost theirs. A road, unlike a marriage, can't be reasoned with or betrayed. It can only be taken and then remade in the image of whoever took it, at least for as long as that person manages to stay alive.